Hey everybody, how are you all doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're finally back to some Metroid talk, as I want to discuss how the announcement of Metroid Dread could possibly affect the release window for Metroid Prime 4. Now, I can see this being a concept that initially many people may hear and say that that's crazy. Why would there be any sort of impact by one game to another when different developers are making two different games? And I understand that, and there even could be some truth to it, but I just happen to think when we look back on the whole sort of announcement and development cycle of Metroid Prime 4, where it was announced in 2017, was silent for 2 years until the only update they gave us was that the game was turning out poorly, and they had to get rid of the old team, they scrapped the old version, and they then brought on Retro Studios to just create and finish a whole brand new version of the game. When you look at that, and then you factor in the fact that within this time frame since it was announced in 2017, we had the announcement and reveal of Metroid Dread, which also now releases in just a couple of months, I do think that there could be something to maybe the overall strategy of releases that Nintendo might be looking at as far as how and when they're making and releasing their Metroid games. And is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think that's tough to say and up to every individual. I kind of see it as a bit of a good thing, but it also might mean that Metroid Prime 4 potentially could be even farther off than many of us want it to be. Before we dive any deeper into the Metroid topic, I like to remind you guys I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I upload several videos every single week, and I live stream around once a week. I cover all things Nintendo, I discuss every single little thing about Metroid, and I discuss all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So the kind of fire starter in my head for this whole concept and conversation today is the fact that before Metroid Dread was announced, I had my own kind of thoughts and predictions about when we might see Metroid Prime 4 and when Metroid Prime 4 might release. Because of course at that time, it was the only Metroid game that we officially knew was being made. As I told you guys, I did hear about a 2D Metroid game a very, very long time ago from a very credible person. But you never really know if something is real until you actually see it's real, no matter what you hear, right? And so I believed for a long time the game was being made, even though I didn't know it was Metroid Dread, just that a 2D Metroid game of some kind was being made. But we didn't know about it. Metroid Prime 4 was the only real, officially announced and confirmed by Nintendo Metroid game being made. And so, like I was saying, I had my own kind of placement of when I thought we might first see the game, which I think will happen before the end of this year, and then when the game would probably release, which I tend to think is probably next year in 2022. But then Metroid Dread comes along, and suddenly we have a new Metroid game being announced. You know, a new game in a franchise that has a massive, huge, die-hard fan base, but also has never been traditionally the biggest selling franchise. And so we've all kind of analyzed Metroid as fans as a franchise that maybe needs a little bit more extra help and attention in order to be successful. And so when we see Metroid Dread get announced, it's like, okay, well now all of a sudden we're seeing Nintendo show that they care enough about the Metroid franchise to have two games being developed at one time. That's a huge deal. It sends a very positive signal to all of us in the gaming community, the Nintendo community, and of course, Metroid fans. And so naturally, us as fans then start to look at Metroid Prime 4. You kind of had to let the dust settle with Metroid Dread before you could start kind of thinking about Metroid Prime 4. I don't know if anyone else felt that. I know I kind of did to a small degree because that initial week after Metroid Dread was announced, it's like the only thing any of us could think about or talk about. It consumed my every waking thought, and it even still kind of does. But, you know, pretty quickly after the announcement and the hype, and I was making so many videos and conversations and stuff, granted, I was healing from an injury at that time too, but I also was like, yeah, but Metroid Prime 4 is also being made. And even though Metroid Dread, Metroid 5 is so exciting, like maybe the most exciting thing almost ever, for myself, I also remind myself that Metroid Prime, the original, is actually my favorite game of all time of any franchise. And so having a new sequel announced to that game, I think it's easy for us to forget how big of a deal it felt when that was announced. Go back to 2017, watch reactions to the Metroid Prime 4 teaser, and even though there was no actual game that they showed, just watch it to kind of remind yourself of really what the hype was like when Metroid Prime 4 was announced. Now with Metroid 5, we're also focused on Metroid Dread and on the 2D Metroid games, which is fantastic. Sakamoto talking about it being the end of the story. There are so many story implications. The gameplay looks out of this world good. The graphics are incredible. I mean, we're also focused on it, but like the Metroid Prime series, we're getting a little sidetracked and forgetting just how popular those games are and how big of a deal Metroid Prime 4 specifically is. And so what I'm trying to get at here when kind of dissecting the importance of the two different Metroid games is how the announcement of Metroid Dread might be affecting the release date for Metroid Prime 4, and the general kind of consensus I've come to in my brain. I know it's taken me a couple of minutes in this video to get to this point here. The general consensus I've come to in my brain is that I think there's a chance that the strategy behind releasing and announcing Metroid Dread now kind of buys them more time to work on Metroid Prime 4 and more time before they might feel pressured to release the game. I think if I could more kind of boil this whole conversation and idea down to its essence in a simpler form, it's that in a world where there was no Metroid Dread being released, that there would be more conversation and pressure on Nintendo and Retro to talk about Metroid Prime 4, to show Metroid Prime 4, and to release Metroid Prime 4 ASAP. Because until Metroid Dread was announced, most people, and this does not include me surprisingly, but most other people have been constantly screaming at Nintendo and Retro about release Metroid Prime 4, show Metroid Prime 4, oh my god, do something with this game. And while I have been wanting that and asking for it and theorizing about it on my channel, I haven't been demanding it because I've been happy to wait for this game to be made as the best version of itself it could be. But so many other people were very vocal about saying, give us this game now, show it to us, oh my god. And that pressure was real. But now Metroid Dread comes along not only as a new Metroid game to kind of have people split their attentions, but also a game releasing in a couple of months. And so it even more takes attention away from Metroid Prime 4. I mean, if you look at the Metroid conversation out there right now, it's very huge and vocal, but not many people are talking about Prime 4. And I think that's okay, because we should obviously be focused on the newest and most immediate game, Metroid Dread, Metroid 5. This is massive. But eventually, like before the end of this year, the hype around Metroid Dread will be done because the game will have released. We will have all played it several times. We'll have seen the story. We've talked about it. We've theorized about it. We've enjoyed it. We've loved it. And then it's like, okay, but what about the next one? Metroid Prime 4 is also being made, so what's going on with that? And that conversation will eventually shift back to Metroid Prime 4. Again, that's going to happen before 2021 is even over. And in a world where Metroid Prime 4 was the only game that they were making, and in a world where Metroid fans were constantly worried that Metroid was always hanging by a thread of life, we were all constantly having to hang those hopes just on Metroid Prime 4. With Metroid 5 coming along, we have more support for the franchise, and we can kind of relax. I think the idea is that with two Metroid games being made, we all feel more support and love from Nintendo for the franchise. I think that we all have a bit less of a worry that the franchise is hanging by a thread of life, right? I don't think many of us feel that way anymore now that we've seen Metroid Dread. And so we can all kind of sit back and just sort of relax and just look at it like any other franchise, knowing that you wait a couple of years for new announcements and updates and new releases, and everything feels a little bit more normal again. We're not completely there. It doesn't feel as safe as a franchise as like a Zelda or a Mario, for example, but I think it feels a lot closer to that than it did before Metroid Dread was announced. And so that again helps us realize that Metroid Prime 4 no longer has the pressure to be the next biggest, greatest thing right now. Like I was saying, I have kind of been predicting that Metroid Prime 4 would probably release in 2022, next year, probably like holiday next year, and that we would also probably see a trailer or a teaser or an update for the game before the year is over. Now, I do still believe that. I think we will probably still see Metroid Prime 4 before the year is over, but as far as the game releasing next year, I'm definitely less sure about it. Part of that even has to do, And I don't want to get too sidetracked on this tangent, but I will say part of it also has to do with the Switch OLED and the next-gen conversation that I've talked to you guys about, and the fact that part of my theory on Metroid Prime 4 releasing at the end of next year had to do that I thought maybe we would see a next-gen upgrade or a next-gen Switch next year as well, and I think Prime 4 is meant to be a cross-generational game. And I do still think that's probably true. And so the announcement of the Switch OLED now has got me thinking, okay, maybe next-gen isn't 2022, but I do still think it's very likely at least 2023, and so maybe that would mean that Metroid Prime 4 also becomes a 2023 game. I mean, all of these concepts are on the table. It's hard for me to make any hard predictions about any of this stuff right now, but more and more things are coming into focus and more things are making sense. To me, both Next Gen and Metroid Prime 4 are making more and more sense as a 2023 release every day. After the announcement of Metroid Dread, after the announcement of the Switch OLED, more things start to take shape and we have a better understanding of what could actually happen. And so I think that without Metroid Dread, the concept of Metroid Prime 4 releasing in 2023 would be a huge deal, and I think it would get a lot of people very upset and very vocal and very angry. To me, it would be crushing, but it wouldn't get me angry. However, Metroid Dread provides such an incredible buffer for the Metroid franchise that it kind of greases the wheels, so to speak, for Retro and Nintendo to not have to release this game and show updates ASAP. They don't have to release this game next year now, because at this point, Metroid Dread coming in 2021 and Prime 4 coming in 23 means there's only a 2-year gap between two Metroid releases, right? And that feels pretty good. That really doesn't feel like a huge, horrible amount of time to wait. I think without Dread, the pressure to release the game next year would be very real. But I think people are going to relax on Retro Studios now and allow them more time, you know, with their words and their comments, I should say. Allow them more time to just make this game and release it in 2023 or whatever. Because, hey, we got Metroid 5. We got Metroid Dread. We believe the franchise isn't on life support anymore. And so we're willing to wait a little bit more. I think it's going to help other people calm down and relax on the Metroid Prime 4 release date, closer to what I feel. Where, like, yes, I want it more than life itself, but I'm not out here trying to hurry or rush the game's development. I'm happy to wait as long as it needs to take, even though they had to restart it in 2019. Just because it was crushing to me doesn't mean that it was angering. I want the game to be amazing and perfect, so I want them to take the time that they need. If this game needs to come out in 2023, it comes out in 2023, and that's going to make it the best version of Metroid Prime 4 it can be. In the meantime, I got Metroid Dread to play, and I'm probably going to play that game 47 times before Metroid Prime 4 comes out. I'm so excited for it, and so hopefully this whole concept and the kind of thesis statement I'm getting at here with this video makes sense to you guys, because I truly think that releasing Metroid Dread now provides a great buffer for Metroid Prime 4, and so maybe they can get a little bit more development time into that game. So what do you guys think? Does this theory and this concept make sense to you guys, or do you think that because they're two unrelated games from unrelated developers that there's no impact from one to the other? I could see a case for that argument, and there's a chance that it's even true. I'm really just putting my own idea out there that announcing and releasing Metroid Dread this year buys Retro Studios and Nintendo more development time for Metroid Prime 4 because there's less pressure on them to do so. That's the idea I'm putting out there, but I could be wrong. Mercury Steam and Retro Studios are not the same developers, and they're not the same teams. And the scope of the projects, the scope of Metroid Dread compared to the scope of Metroid Prime 4, also very different. So there is a chance that there's no relation and each game is just on its own path to its own release. And that's also fine. I'm not like complaining about one way or the other. It's more just my prediction that from a business sense, from a release calendar sense, that Nintendo sees that they are able to buy themselves some more time with Metroid Prime 4 by announcing Metroid Dread. Do you guys agree with this, or do you disagree with this and you think that I'm wrong? Whatever you feel, talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.